is Axel mentioned that one of the problems with one of the originating attack vectors in the SolarWinds incident was the use of DLLs and code libraries that were compromised. And that idea was new information to me. So, for example, we have a cybersecurity company called CI Security that has a really impressive team of professionals. It's made up of former CISO of Seattle and one of the guys that wrote the HIPAA legislation, et cetera. And I had been paying attention to their coverage of this incident while it was unfolding in the first few days and weeks, and they mentioned this in passing. I mean, they gave it all of 3 seconds and focused on everything else, right? Like how the attack unfolded and all the subsequent things. But I think Axel hit on something very important that I frankly didn't hear anybody else mention. The other thing that I think we saw, which for me sort of looms large, is this idea. Ken Pala, who's here with us today, posted an article where, you know, SolarWinds 123 was a password that was on one of the systems. And there was a firm that brought this and other kinds of sort of poor cyber hygiene practices to the attention of executives at SolarWinds, and it sort of fell on deaf ears. And one of the other tangential problems was that they didn't have a CISO in their company until as recent as 2 years ago, which sort of speaks to the maturity of the cybersecurity program at SolarWinds. So those are kind of some of the things that sort of large takeaways. I'll skip this because Chris already covered this, but some of the latest news, and literally this is as of a few days ago, you know, I read, some of the things that I read are like ZDNet and Bleeping Computer and Motherboard and Threatpost and Dark Reading and some of these forums that I think a lot of you are probably familiar with if you pay attention to cybersecurity news. And this is some of the stuff that's coming out, right? So number one, Microsoft SolarWinds attack 1,000, and so Brad Smith, I think the chief legal officer of Microsoft, was, you know, giving an interview and said that their estimation, because it took about 500 engineers at Microsoft to do a sort of a postmortem on this thing, about their involvement as being part of the exploit and part of the supply chain, was that the threat actors had a team of approximately 1,000 or more engineers devoted to this. So what does that speak to in terms of attribution, right? The other thing, again, all of the patching guidance around SolarWinds and subsequent remediation that needs to happen for companies that are using the Orion product. Are people actually doing this, and to what degree, right? So is the gap widening in terms of the delta between where we need to be in terms of our posture of these tools that we use to orchestrate network management, right? And, you know, I don't necessarily need to go over all the headlines, but you see, you know, here, number 4 is an example of another kind of supply chain attack that was done in a lab setting, right? There's been others in the wild that have been documented prior to SolarWinds. I think the most one that I think I relate to is the WannaCry, the NotPetya Ukrainian accounting firm used as a launch pad to then spread the wormable malware globally, which hit Merck. Pharmaceutical, Maersk, shipping, et cetera, took a bunch of companies offline for about a month and caused about $1 billion in damages, right? So, okay. You guys can read the text, but, and again, please feel free to chime in, ask questions. I don't want to talk at you. This is more of just a prompt for us to then sort of pivot towards the questions that Chris and Shmuel prepared.
Alex, I have a question for you. Did any, I didn't follow up in enough detail in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Did anybody try to basically completely replicate, besides that researcher, which I understand what he did and I read his stuff, does anybody try to replicate and use those attack vectors in their own company to see how it works and to learn from it and see how deep and how far you can get away, or what you can get away with if you use this technology?
Well, I think what you're referring to would be sort of a tabletop that then reverse engineers the initial attack and sort of does it. I think while that may be worthwhile, the scope and sophistication of this thing would be hard to replicate, so I'm not sure what the benefit of that exercise would be, right? I mean, I think the point is that, yeah.
It's not only to replicate, it's actually to extend it. So once you have a foot in the door, now the question is how you open the rest of the door. And I believe that what we are seeing is just like a hint of what is happening, and there could be more, because it's like when you develop technology, you learn something and it takes you some time to play with it until you master it, and then you expand it into other things, and you learn more about other things as results. Um, my concern is that the lesson learned cannot be just strictly theoretical in this case.
No, well, I think what you're alluding to is what Asher says is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he sent me a chat earlier and said, oh, yeah, we're in for a difficult cyber year. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And I agree. I mean, if you look at the text box on the right here, we're still trying to get attribution sort of done here in terms of who did this definitively and how exactly they got it. There seem to be multiple sort of vectors, right? And so I think that speaks to the complexity of trying to replicate this in a lab setting. So I think Axel wanted to chime in.
Yeah,
or somebody.
So I can tell you what we did in the last 2 weeks that I was at Axiato. We had a look at every single one of our servers, all of the firmware, and saw, in fact, that we didn't get compromised, but that was largely only due to the fact that we didn't use SolarWinds. But if you use the SolarWinds products, and pretty much particularly Orion, you have to give it permission to do a firmware update. So it's really trivial, right? And so we saw that it's easily possible. And as I said, we verified that none of the servers had a compromised set of firmware in it. But of course, it doesn't mean that there is no compromised operating system or application software anywhere else. So that's why, for my new company, we're just assuming everything is breached. Literally, everything is breached. Right? The only thing that's not breached is the server that holds the design data at this point in time, because I'm working very closely with the two leading people within the FreeBSD project, and they are fairly certain that for the operating system we built, as minimal as it's possible, there is no intrusion and there was no compromise of any of the DLLs. But really, I mean, for us, the conclusion was we have to assume that everything is compromised, everything.
I think that the guidance was tear down and replace, or tear down and rebuild, right?
Burn down and rebuild. It's effectively really what it means.
And I'd like to support that for a moment and just put a signpost on the freeway here, and that is, I'm not a real big fan of trying to cure the symptoms. I want to cure the disease, and the disease is that we're trying to fix something that parenthetically cannot be fixed. So I think it's time that the house was remodeled. That's how you fix this problem, in my opinion. But that's a redesign of the infrastructure for the entire planet going forward. You either want to fix it, or we just keep putting our finger in the dike and plugging up holes. And that's just, yeah.
I'm glad you say that, because that's exactly the case I try to make with my prior company. Axiato was focusing on exactly that, right? So I agree. I completely agree.
So it comes from the chip level up, and that's how you fix this. And we redesign chips. Shmuel and I've argued the point. I'm a big fan of seeing TCP/IP die. I want to see it. I want to see it dead. But he says that that's impossible. He's smarter than me in these things. But I really do think it's kind of a grassroots thing. You start from the chip level, and then you make a secure environment. And as we all know, everything can be broken. So it'll get broken, but we'll be the ones who are always one step ahead. And with the foundation that we're dealing with right now, we'll never get it fixed. It's always going to be just curing the symptoms and never curing the disease.
Guys,
speaking of that part,
let's not look at solutions yet. I'm not sure we're clear about what's the problem.
Yeah,
let's spark some of those.
There are more than one root cause, and let's first understand all the different things that happen and things that we want to say about them, or what we truly understand. And then we haven't done any root cause analysis on any of the factors. We just listen to facts at this time. So let's just read the facts.
Okay.
Well, one
So-
comment on, if I can get in for a second. One issue is, as was pointed out, getting the right tools and infrastructure, whether it's hardware, software, or combination thereof in place. But another issue that I think needs to be addressed is that there aren't any universal standards for what makes a system secure. So everybody is doing their own ad hoc solutions. And one thing, we could think about is how you put the right kind of standards in place, whether it's, organizations have to have some kind of certificate saying that, yes, they've passed a certain level of security or whatever. But if you don't do that, then you kind of don't have the motivation for people to want to make the changes.
Stan?
Yes, I'm listening to this, and I'm reflecting back to the 1980s, which is when I started in the field, looking at formal methods. I was working at Rayter, and we took the Bell LaPadula security model and modified it to try to look at how we might provably secure a system, mathematically prove that it was secure. I mean, we've seen formalisms at play. They're coming back now even. And Axel, with what you're doing down at the infrastructure level. But at the same time, I recall mid-1980s, the beginning of the Software Engineering Institute, the whole emphasis on maturity models and how do we rigorously build security into our applications. And here we are 40 years later, and I look at code that's written by software people, and it's like they never heard about design reviews. They've never heard about linking requirements to testing. It's not that we don't know how to do this. It's that there's been no national, international impetus that let's do it right. And now we're in the situation we've got to rebuild at the same time as this machine is flying 600 miles an hour, or maybe faster than that. So I think that in some ways, I think frames the challenge we're in, and add to it until and unless we get everybody at the user level, not clicking on phishing emails and things like that. I think we're that's still going to remain a weak link in this entire process.
And I think you're
Right.
absolutely
Yeah,
right.
and-
Of course, the benefit of software is that it's perceived to be cheap. And of course, that means that everybody can write a piece of software. And for as long as it doesn't crash, for the most part, it's considered good enough, right?
Exactly.
That's part of the problem we're facing. And that's not easily going to go away, because I think the issue is, and the major driver is, it's cheap. Therefore, we use it and we make it and we write it the way it's written.
One of the things, it recently came up again in Bloomberg. I mean, I'm sure that many of you guys heard about the super micro boards that everyone tried to hide that problem all away.
No, please. I have a YouTube video on it, posted explicitly for that. A CAD design tool will tell you if there's an extraneous chip, and the pick and place tool from any of the suppliers, Siemens, whatever, they take it directly from the CAD tools. There is no extraneous chip on it. What they did was they manipulated the firmware, which is good enough, right? But there is no extraneous chip. The Bloomberg guys, I usually I respect them a lot, but in this case, this is absolute bullshit.
Well, that would be enough as well. If you gave a design that's supposed to do X, and in the process of making the board for you, it does Y, and you're unaware of it, you got a problem. And it doesn't matter in what level you did it, on the firmware or on a chip level. I mean, one way or another, you still have a problem. You didn't get what you wanted.
I agree. I totally agree with the fact that if you manipulate the firmware, you don't get what you want, right? That's obvious. But an extraneous chip, and I've been using Supermicro for a very long time. I know exactly what's on their boards. The chips are all marked. You know exactly what they do. That's absolute. Bloomberg should have recanted that story because it's baloney.
So Axel, the question
there's a lot
is
of,
when the board is being manufactured outside of the United States by
Yeah.
any company, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be Supermicro. How
Mhm.
do you have any control on the process that when you got the board, it's executing what it's supposed to do and it's not manipulated to something
So
else?
I've worked with all of the PCB design tools, be it Cadence or Mentor, or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it gives you the BOM and it gives you the placement, and the BOM and placement is used by the pick and place machines because there is no manual interaction, right? And so you know, and then when the board comes back, you basically take a giant photo of it and you compare that with the existing design that the CAD tool spat out. And then you know if it's the same that you designed or not. And they are the same, I can guarantee you that.
And you
so
test.
Axel, you, go ahead, Axel, what was that?
I was gonna say you test every board. I mean, if I'm a production
Yes.
line, I can give you 100 boards that are fine, but boards 1,000 and above are different.
No, believe me, they these days quality control, particularly Supermicro, and I know that because Supermicro is not innovative. They're a follower, right? Supermicro is very, very concerned about anything that could possibly go wrong. The last thing they want is a warranty case because they can't afford it. They're working at margin levels that are too slim to afford a warranty case. Therefore, Supermicro is one of the best when it comes to quality control. They take a picture of every damn board and they archive it.
So the story was fake, in your opinion?
There was a lot of controversy around it. Yeah, there was.
Yeah,
I had a hard time following it. There was a lot of back and forth there.
The story is baloney. It's bullshit. I mean, as I said, I respect Bloomberg a lot, but that story is utter bullshit.
Okay.
So Axel, you postulated one of your emails about the problem of having a development center in Eastern Europe or Ukraine. I think you said close to the GRU. So is that kind of nation state pressure that could be applied to Kaspersky, right, or anybody else over there? Does Supermicro exempt from that, given that they operate in Asia and China? Or?
No, so all of the Supermicro boards are built in Taiwan, not in China, right? Okay. So that's a benefit. In fact, they have that over Lenovo. So if you buy IBM, you in fact buy Lenovo, right? Lenovo is designed and built in China. I would trust Lenovo a whole lot less than I would trust Supermicro, right? And to some degree, that's even true. The low-end HPE stuff is all made in China and designed in China, right? So I trust those guys a whole lot less than I trust Supermicro.
Okay.
So yes, physical proximity
yeah.
to the GRU is definitely a problem, right? There's no doubt about that. No way would I outsource anything, hardware, software, firmware development to Ukraine. No way.
And so just to clarify that, because we don't want to disparage nationalities for the sake of nationality disparagement, but your implication is that they're unable to essentially resist the pressure from the state apparatus that they're surrounded by.
That's correct.
Is that the implication?
Basically, we've had so when I was at Axiato, we tried to modify pfSense such that it can run in a multi-threaded environment, right? And so I got offers to fix pfSense. It has a bunch of critical vulnerabilities that reduce security and performance of it. So I wanted that fixed. On top of that, it had GPL3 software in it, and I wanted that fixed too. So I had an open request for a proposal, and the common theme was that the RFPs were answered by 4 companies out of the Ukraine. All of them would have charged us about $1.8 million. And they all had roughly the same approach on how to do it. And I can guarantee you that had we outsourced that to the Ukraine, the GRU would have installed officers as coders in the company executing this change. I can guarantee you that.
I think all 4 companies had the same address, whether they said that or not. So.
They were very close to each other, yes.
And
I got a question, Axel. So we know about SolarWinds and how one particular company allowed to be the connector to many, many other hacks. Why would it be any different of installing a person or a team of people inside, let's say, Supermicros, just pick on them, that would actually change from an engineering point the content of the firmware. It will be tweaked without the knowledge of the right
Okay,
people and
so
write it through.
yes, so theoretically possible, but let me put it this way. The hardware has been verified by everybody who uses it. And in fact, I'm using Supermicro. I've used it for all of my companies, SSR Labs, Perimix, Axiato, and now Abacus. And we look at every single main board because, again, I don't trust anybody, right? There's no chip on the damn board that I don't recognize. I recognize all of them. So if I were an attacker, I wouldn't add a chip. Why would you want to do that? Because first of all, there's a performance implication, right? If all of the data goes through the chip, then it would have to be either faster than all of the application processors that Supermicro puts there on purpose to do the stuff that needs to get done. And that would be a very big chip with a very big heatsink. I would find that, right? If it's a teeny tiny chip, it's a PHY or it's something that really has no impact on anything. And if you look at where the data goes, there is a switch in there anyway that can replicate data. It's basically, doing port mirroring, right? So you could do that theoretically in a PHY, but why? It's too difficult. The performance implications are drastic, and you would see it upon inspection. It is much easier, much easier to change the firmware, and I can tell you why. The firmware, even on the newest servers you can buy, and be it HPE, IBM, Supermicro, Quanta, Wistron, all of these guys, doesn't matter. The firmware is rooted in stuff that was developed at AMI 30 years ago. They modify that slightly, and then they put the same shit into the boards. The only difference being it now can enumerate devices that didn't exist 30 years ago. That's the only difference, right? So modifying that is normal anyway, because you look at what's the enumeration sequence, what's the range of where it enumerates. And then today, of course, you've got a boot from disk, you've got a boot from the network, you got a pre-boot environment. All of these things, they're easy to modify. I mean, literally. We've had at Axiato, we've had a white hat hacker. It took him 15 minutes to add something to it that was pretty nefarious. 15 minutes, right?
And nowadays, that code could be very big. That firmware, you could fit so much stuff in it. 30 years ago, you could only fit a small amount, and you could also store it in there and send it out later at a slower rate.
Correct. So by today, you've got a ginormously big flash chip, and you've got a pre-boot environment on disk, and you've got EFI or UEFI, right? This is all stuff that adds to complexity and therefore subtracts from your security because there's just more shit.
So what's the solution?
Okay. Well, we're going to get into the solutions. Actually, we have some really good questions that folks have put together, but you see my image there of the person shoveling against the tide. I wish it were not so, but unfortunately that's where we are, and the tide is getting stronger and our shovel is shrinking, I think is maybe one way to put it. One of the things about the tip of the iceberg in terms of the impact of all of this is the fact that FireEye's sort of their own offensive hacking tools were stolen, which I think what's going to happen now is there's been some press about the fact that whoever did this, let's for the sake of conversation, let's say the Russians did it, they're going to outsource or hand over persistence and access to organized crime groups who will then execute ransomware campaigns. North Korea uses this as a way to generate revenue for their nuclear program. So I told Asher, I said this, I mean, I feel like I've been saying we're in for a bad cyber year since 2017, and I think we're in for a bad cyber year, unfortunately. So, okay.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
Alex, I just wanted to test two things on that, on going back to FireEye. So one is, right, the pen test can be run against other companies by the bad actors and know where the vulnerabilities are. It also tells whomever did this, it gave them the teacher's edition, right, of what actually is being tested against the companies who've already been working with FireEye. So by induction, you can figure out where they haven't been focused too, right? So I feel like there's another implication there too, that's maybe a little more subtle.
Yeah, yeah. Subtle, but actually is like, I really like that point. I think it's the bigger problem in all of this is that it allows for sophisticated attacks, right? So because you know, like if you can get a sense of FireEye's client list and go, okay, we know what these guys have been sort of doing their gap assessments against, right? And we'll just I'll go after the gap using their tools. So yeah, troubling. Yeah, and if the inconclusive attribution still think, I don't know if I'm being naive with this, but this bothers me on some level. One of the things that as, you know, somebody who endeavors to grow as a cybersecurity professional, one of the things that's hard for me is the lack of attribution to some of this stuff and a lack of understanding of the attack vectors and how some of these attacks unfold. It's not just this incident. It's a lot of, when I work with a few firms that do incident response, and the problem is clients don't want to pay for that piece of it. They want to just pay for the response to the incident. They often don't want to pay for the forensics and post-mortem analysis piece of how the attack actually happened, which invites the same thing to occur a year later. But the fact that we're unable to conclusively say who did this is troubling to me on some level. And I don't know if that's just me being, sort of clinging on to something that is wishful thinking or something. But anyway. Okay, yeah, and I summarize, when you look at the sophistication of this attack, right, that's there, but it's also bad OPSEC by the companies that were being targeted, right? If it's bad password management, lack of, having a cybersecurity executive on the team, you can get a sense of, how seriously a business takes cyber risk by the fact that they're a global enterprise and doesn't seem to find it necessary to hire a CISO. So, you could see some of the things that have been identified as techniques used, right? At each one of these and any of the four major variants of malware that were developed specifically for this attack, each one of these would be a major incident all its own. And we've got a compilation of 8 or 9 really novel advanced techniques coupled with really sophisticated custom-built malware, right? And so, just again, talks about the sophistication of the actor who did this. I think Shmuel mentioned working on a privacy product that has to do with identity management. There was a component of this as part of this whole incident as well, which I hadn't learned. I didn't hear about this SAML exploit component until recently. I read an article about it. So there's more news still coming out about the various facets of this incident. And so that wraps it up for our recap. I just want to remind folks, especially new guests today, that we do have a Slack channel that's fairly active, and we welcome your contributions there. It's a great way to stay engaged between meetings and not drown ourselves in email. We do have a YouTube channel where Axel's presentation is posted. There's a video of that and a PDF of the slides as well. And we have a Google Drive repository for content, which all of this is supposed to enable our continued dialogue and development of, potential solutions in between meetings. So just know that that's there. And if you want to be invited to any of it, we can do that and send you the links. So I'll stop sharing, and I'm excited to dive into some of the questions that Chris came up with.
So this is Ken. One question for you, Alex. We've been talking about specific, types of chips and so on, but with so much going into the cloud, the typical customer of cloud services doesn't really have access to any of that. So it's great if you're your own company and you can say, I'm going to use Supermicro chips alone, but in the cloud world, what does this mean, or how do you translate it?
Well, I actually, believe it or not, Amazon and Microsoft and Google did a very good job in making sure that they have configuration management. So they know exactly what they are buying, and you can be relatively certain that they are much better in terms of the security, both hardware and software, than the smaller providers who oftentimes simply don't have the manpower to verify that, in fact, the hardware is as ordered and all the other stuff. So, I wouldn't, there are many reasons why I personally don't use a cloud, and none of my servers are in the cloud except for the web server and the email server, because that's really a don't care, right? So if we lose those, who the hell cares, right? Everything else I care about, and I still assume them to be compromised, but rest assured, I look at every single piece of hardware that comes in here and every single piece of firmware that needs to be updated, I will look through it, right? So, but then again, this is a very small operation. We've got, servers or something like that. That's all that there is, right? But still, I think making this alone an issue of Google and Microsoft and Amazon, I think that's probably one of the very few items and areas where I would say these guys are better than many others.
Well,
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, one quick question on that. While I believe that their underlying hardware and the virtual monitors, hypervisors they install would be secure, people run their own stuff on top of that, and then there's no guarantee that the stuff that given cloud customers run actually stays secure just because it's running on Google or Microsoft or anything.
Well, okay, let's step back a little bit. I didn't say that the stuff running on their servers is secure. What I'm saying is their configuration management makes it sure that they have no unintended hardware in the hardware that they order, and that very likely the firmware that they have is not compromised. It doesn't mean that the hypervisor isn't compromised. It doesn't mean that the operating system isn't compromised, right? So therefore, the assumption of the entire stack being secure because just you made the server reasonably secure, I think that conclusion cannot be drawn, right? I think that would be overstating even a possible solution.
So, okay, so Chris, let's, or Shmuel, can you throw up those questions in that summary recap document?
It's Shmuel, it's the one you sent out on Monday.
I can share it real quick if you'd like.
Yeah. And we've answered, a few of these things we've already hit on organically earlier in the discussion, which is great. So we can kind of zoom in on some fresh fodder that we haven't talked about. And maybe while we're pulling that up, I'll ask one question I have of this group. There were, we've been calling it the SolarWinds hack, and deservedly so for the most part. But about 2 weeks ago, there were some reports, and I've had trouble kind of backing them up, but reports that about a third of the organizations that appear to be compromised did not have obvious or direct ties to SolarWinds. And there hasn't been a lot in the last week or two. So what, if that is true, what do we think is going on there?
Well, I think that sort of goes back.
Go ahead, Axel.
I think that sort of goes back to what the address and the attack vector was, right? So as I said, it's very likely, and we have evidence for at least some of the open source files being compromised that are used for compiling Linux, right? So the likelihood that a compromised DLL or a compromised library is only used for SolarWinds is, of course,
gotcha.
So
sort
of something
the open source libraries
we cannot make, right?
Yeah.
So very likely what happened was the attackers identified a bunch of libraries that are used for a wide variety of things. And the first ones to actually fix them, actually not fix them, the first ones to find them was not SolarWinds, and was in fact FireEye and Microsoft using SolarWinds software, right? But that doesn't mean that they have identified every single library that could have been used to make this access happen. And this is all fairly nefarious because, again, it could be a DLL that's still out there that nobody has looked at, and that's still vulnerable and still malicious as of today because it hasn't been identified. It was first used in SolarWinds Orion software, right? But that doesn't mean it's the only one that's affected. Yep. And so therefore, I think making the statement and assuming that only SolarWinds customers are and going to be affected, that's probably a little bit risky because I certainly don't know if we found all of the infected DLLs.
Right. Okay. That's great. So we'll definitely broaden our references. And I think that gets important, when we start thinking about solutions that we would be, kind of solving too narrowly if we're just thinking this is really about, primarily around one vendor.
At the same time, there was some documentation about a Chinese threat actor using other techniques that was incidents that went off right around the same time this was unfolding. Who knows if it's related or not? And I frankly don't trust the organizations that were in scope who don't have an association with SolarWinds to give us and themselves an accurate appraisal of what happened to them. I mean, so, we just don't have enough data to correlate whether these are coordinated attacks or sort of the timing is just coincidental. It's just, yeah, but I also did see that, Chris. It begs the question, so.
Yeah. And so this certainly multi-pronged approach, and this has been exploited by everybody. I mean, I'm keeping a log of my firewall access, and I can tell you that 10 years ago it was easy because you could find out the Chinese Academy of Military Sciences. I mean, as soon as it was a new startup and they found a new IP address, they pinged you and probed you, right? In fact, they tried to run a net scan on your net. So that was fairly simple 10 years ago because they were unable to hide their origin. What they do today is they hijack a computer in the US and then use that as a springboard to probe your network. So you never know where that exactly comes from because they've getting better at spoofing their IP addresses, right? So I'm pretty certain that today China does it, and of course North Korea does it, and the Russians do it, and others do it. But I can nearly always guarantee you they've gotten a whole lot better than they were 10 years ago. A lot.
And have we gotten,
like I said, good OPSEC by the bad guys and bad OPSEC by the good guys, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say on that note, I just wonder what it will take for us to be able to get better at the same rate that the bad actors are. Are we? How far off are we in our trajectory and our velocity of improvement?
I think if you think we can catch up with the bad guys, you are underestimating their creativity, right?
Yeah, it's much more easy to wreck something than it is to.
Exactly. And particularly considering how badly written software today is and how big it is. I mean, just for shits and grins, if you've got to look at it, right? Linux today comprises of about 25 million lines of code. It's 200,000 source code files included in it, in the build. One of the reasons I like FreeBSD, for example, is it's a hell lot smaller. It's less than 10,000 files, and it's less than, I think, total 1.5 million lines of code or something like that, right? So not that it's easy to review, 1.5 million lines of code, but at least if I have a look at how malloc on free works in FreeBSD, that's one page as a printout, right? I can verify, yep, that looks reasonable to me, right? If you try to do the same for Linux, good grief, malloc. Yeah, no, sorry, I'm not going there.
Excellent. Why is the US or any other country not playing offense instead of playing defense? Why are we not going and just whack the life out of anyone out there in Russia, in North Korea? I mean, they can hack, we can hack too.
I think we are. If you look at the Varonis attack map, right, there's a lot of that traffic originates from over here and flies over to Asia or Africa or even Western Europe. A lot of Western European traffic is originating and landing over in the Eastern Hemisphere. So we're doing it, but I think we have sort of our hands are a little bit tied in some regard, right? Because we're, encumbered by laws and, rules of engagement, et cetera. So.
We're too nice.
Hey, Alex, two questions. One, why aren't there trusted automated tools for scanning the DLLs and doing, especially when they're massive in size, provided by some sort of open source consortium so that there's multiple parties who have to confirm that the scan code is doing what it's supposed to be doing, not necessarily changing the code at will, but so that you could resurrect an open source library without it becoming a nightmare?
Well, I think if you've got to look particularly at how the Linux ecosystem works, which is now the backbone of the internet, everything that has to do with the kernel is personally approved by Linus Torvalds. Everything else has contributors and configuration management appointees. But for the most part, they are volunteers, right? And so for as long as they rubber stamp something, they rubber stamp it. Right? And I can guarantee you, considering how many new contributions are made on a daily basis to the code base, they don't look through everything line by line. I can guarantee you that.
So the other thought that comes to mind is just a generic one, which is, when did cities in the United States stop burning down? Because it was a thing in like the 19th century that cities would just burn to the ground. And the answer is when they had fire insurance. because fire insurance, the companies started insisting on fire inspections and fire codes. And over time, 50 years, they eventually were able to make fires something that actually are relatively rare these days. And sort of what's missing is a sort of while there's insurance today, they don't have the ability to push the system to letting capitalism work for us, to change the whole architecture of how this is done in a way that is more defensible and self-healing.
I've made that exact same argument, and I think you were even in the room when I made the argument to you, to Earl, and to Shmuel, when I said in Germany, nuclear power died, not because the Greens finally succeeded. It was when after Fukushima, the reinsurer said, oh, by the way, we will tenfold your insurance rates for each nuclear reactor because it's pretty damn expensive to clean the shit up. Right? It had nothing to do with Angela Merkel and the Atomausstieg, and it had nothing to do with the Greens. It was the reinsurers.
We lost you.
It will cost us 5 billion, not 500 million to clean up, right? That's what killed it. So I totally agree, Steve. I think you're absolutely right. We have to have something that says, if you operate and you do this and your data is exposed or threatened to be exposed, here's what you must do. You must insure. And then the insurance companies will come and their reinsurers will come and they will assess how big the risk is depending on how lax you are with requirements for password, or if you have outdated hardware in your firewalls, or if you don't maintain your firewall rule set or stuff like that, right? I think it will come, but it will have to be through the insurance and reinsurers. So I'm totally in agreement with Steve. Absolutely.
It would have been interesting to get Jason's comments on that. He's extremely knowledgeable about the cyber risk insurance landscape. So, but financial incentive, I think, is a major component in this. I think if that were off the table, I think we'd see a major decrease in this activity. And the other thing I think is that we need some sort of a public awareness campaign aimed at the general public. All of the stuff that CISA and everybody else sends out, I mean, it goes to the people that already know and appreciate cybersecurity. The average citizen here has no appreciation for how valuable their data is, and that they can't go around carousing on the internet with their data, the same way that they have, rules and inhibitions around transferring and transacting in money. Data equals money. I think people need to understand about, their behavior on the internet and how valuable their personal information and data is. And I think that'll take a national campaign of the sort we had around tobacco use and seatbelts in cars to get people to really, to secure the village, as Stan talks about. So that's lacking, I think.
I would love to see a piece of software that's a free app that you could have in your browser, that every time you did something on your browser would show you where your data went and how it was resold, and show the tendrils of a web of all the places things about you were being bought and sold. And you could kind of get like, that click you just did was worth this amount of money. And here's all the players that you've never heard of who just made a fraction of a cent on you by your doing that.
So
things like that would be, I think people would be astounded.
So one of the things that shocked me going to DEF CON year after year is looking at the stock price that is the individual profile. And it's only like $6 to $10 is where it varies. Like, it's not a lot of money on an individual basis. I think that the cost of the headache for the individual is probably the higher thing, the better thing to surface. Because where a hacker is only going to get, $10 off of somebody's, social security number, credit cards, and everything that they're eventually going to exploit. There's the headache of having to go and cancel all your credit cards and that whole process is a lot more expensive for the consumer. I just posted a link, something that I picked up at the last DEF CON. There's this tool called Local Sheriff, and it actually will tell you whenever you go to a website, who else is snooping and what they're doing with the information, and how many links further it's being passed along. So you can actually trace like what's going on with an individual website. And it's shocking to see like how many different people are are taking advantage of the information from your browser history.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, we'll post that on our resources page on the IFTBA website. That's great.
I did want to raise a question of like, there's a cost benefit analysis, and the fact that over 1,000 engineers were involved in this hack. Like, what is the benefit on the other side? Like, that's, if anything, that suggests that there is actually some things that we're doing right if it takes 1,000 engineers, for the bad actors to put together to be able to do something, unless it's more of an exploratory mission to figure out, what else that they could take down later on. That's
No, I think it's, I have that in my blog, actually. The answer to that is very simple. The answer to that is multi-pronged. So what they want to do is they want to destabilize the US political system, right? So the less trust there is in the infrastructure, and the less trust there is in elections, and the less trust there is in banking and all kinds of communication that is electronic communication, the more people will become, I wouldn't quite say all QAnon followers, but the more they will believe in non-facts. And once you have a society that is entirely disassociated from facts and from science, it becomes a hell lot easier to manipulate them, right? So it has an economic impact, it has a societal impact, and it has an impact on the stability of the democracy in the US. And not only the US, actually, all of the Western countries.
I think Axel hit the nail on the head. So I've been listening, and just some fantastic conversations going on. And so this is one of the things that we talked about at Secure the Village over the summer, is this issue of trust. And it boils down to trust. What do you trust? What do you not trust? Phenomena like the limited availability of Bitcoin and its increasing value, and whether or not you trust that medium. So, but ultimately, I think one of the things that really helped us understand why these kinds of issues might be occurring is by separating what essentially is this problem into what we refer to the ground war versus the air war. So we're in the trenches trying to get the ground war right, building the chips right, programming well, right? The air war is the trust factor. So, and what's interesting is that we did have a great presentation from one of my mentors, Dr. Vince Cerf, came in and did a series on a cyber fire department concept, like Stephen had mentioned, that issue of how the fire brigades used to essentially, and correlating what happened with fire departments, being private sector, and then insurance companies taking over, and then eventually it became a public sector function. So, and so what it boils down to is that who's fighting the ground war, who's fighting the air war. And there is a movement, fortunately, called cyberstability.org. You can go to the site, I'll post it. And it's basically the top down. It's and I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's the digital UN of the world. And every country will assemble what are called cybersecurity norms. So that helps deal with the trust issue from the top down. So we have a tops down issue that has to be addressed and a bottoms up issue. And the tops down issue is primarily trust and political. So Axel, you couldn't have said it more succinctly, but there's a couple of things that I would suggest everyone take a look at. One is cyberstability.org. And the other is this presentation that Vint gave to Secure the Village. It's a YouTube prezo. Watch it later. It's entertaining at the same time. For those of you that don't know Dr. Cerf, he's one of the architects of the internet and the TCP/IP protocol, and he's calling for an IPv6 only network moving forward. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, double NAT, triple NAT, large scale NAT, or CGN, carrier grade NAT issues. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned I was a backbone engineer designer for NTT. That's how I started my career. So I'm an internet plumber, folks. That's what I'm good at. And what I've learned is that when I crossed over into business ownership and enterprise IT, what I learned very quickly is that when you work for a service provider, a backbone provider, the network is everything. They get all the budget. When you go to an enterprise, generally your network engineering team, they are the underdogs. They are fighting for the budget, and they don't get it because the majority of the people in IT and traditional brick and mortar companies are not network engineers. And so when it comes to fighting for budget, guess who gets neglected? So those kinds of things are problems that there's no tool is going to solve that. So there needs to be a mindset change as well to solve this problem as we attack it from the ground up, but make sure that we're also attacking it from the tops down. So I've said my piece, but I do encourage all of you to please take a look at that video. It's a Secure the Village channel. The segment where he talks about the cyber fire department is in that video as well, and what he suggests we do moving forward, as well as many other scientists. So check out cyberstability.org as well. I'll put that into chat. And sorry for taking so much time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, George. So in terms of time management, we don't have a lot of time left, and those questions. I think we could post them in the chat, and if there's one or two that we want to kind of try to tackle, or maybe we put that off for a subsequent discussion. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of continued interest in this topic. That's obvious, right? So.
Yes, Alex, I think we'll definitely run out of time very quickly, and I'm very much interested of how we move forward. I was hoping that during this conversation, we'll be able to at least address some of the facts. What do we know? And it seems like that there's a lot of things are still coming. The other shoe didn't drop yet. Do we agree the shoe didn't drop yet? We are still waiting for more to come. And if that's true, it's okay to kind of like, let's wait for a month or a month and a half and revisit the subject. So we can have for our next meeting, we will focus on privacy because we want to start on that subject as well. And then for the following meeting, we'll do a third round on the subject. Hopefully by that time, we'll have a little bit more understanding of what are the facts, what's going on, what are the new things that are coming, and we may start to think of, are there ways to address these problems in ways that other people didn't think or yes think, and also how to help the communities who are and will struggle with the ramification of what has happened and what may still happening without us being able to stop it. If this makes any sense, I think that will be the simple takeaway from today. We will definitely post all this information, not just on our chat and information. As we get to the website, we'll start to post. We may want to have a page on security, and that would be our first subject, and things can follow through from there. We do have multiple. We have more information here, so we'll post it on the chat. What I found interesting is maybe just to share, if you guys willing to just listen for 2 minutes, I'll just go for the first line on each and every subject and just see if we captured everything, kind of like implications and open questions. Maybe I'll share my screen and I'll just do that. Alex, are you okay with that? Okay, I can't hear you, but I'm assuming yes. Okay, good. I'll do that. Share, SolarWinds, Google Doc. Okay, share it. Okay, hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing, which is implications and open questions with Alex popping at the top. So basically, we agree that all organizations should consider themselves as targets for this attack. It's not just SolarWinds, it's outside of that scope as well. We also, I think we all agree, and jump if you disagree, that the other shoe has not fully dropped yet. We are still waiting. And I'm not going to the detail. We also kind of like agree, and I've heard it in the presentation, both from Axel and others, that company cybersecurity defense only as strong as the weakest partner, because we are working with partners. We also mentioned the fact that there are so many lines of code out there. Do we really know how to review those codes? And people, it's probably not the answer. Human review is probably not the answer. I'm just sneaking things in here, I'm sorry. Next, how should company like SolarWinds be held accountable? It's a question. I don't know what the answer, and I'm not sure that they need to be held accountable. I think we'll address that as well. Okay, within the retail anti-crime risk management space, long question.
I can summarize that, Shmuel, if you
Please.
want. Yeah. So the idea there's a lot of within e-commerce and retail banking, and Ken knows this certainly. A lot of the big companies are moving to cloud-hosted solutions where they once hosted them on premises. So although what we haven't seen is a directed attack at banks, at Amazon, and et cetera, knowing that these solutions now are in part cloud solutions, if they were targeted, what might that look like, and what should these companies be thinking about?
Okay, good question, and the answer for that might be interesting to the large community. And this is also part of the next question about cloud computing and cloud computing partitions. Okay, okay. And then the next one, which I touched before, which is theoretically every piece of software, be it based on open source or not, is fundamentally could be compromised. And the fact that we are looking at so many people who are participating in providing software, and there's very little control over that. What can we do about it? The next subject is, okay, so what we understand so far, both target and motivation. So who are the bad actors? Do we really know? And I would add another question to this list, has to do with, well, what about IPv6? That was a good, kind of like a good segue that was raised during this meeting, and I was like puzzled. Okay, can IPv6 help in any way solve a problem like this? How IPv6 is even related to the subject? But that's kind of like my thing going in my brain right now. Any other thing that we should add to this list, please? Pipe in.
One other thing that came to mind, I can't remember who used the phrase burning, we need to burn it all down, is just looking at the GRU attack on Ukraine a couple of years ago, where they did, similar MO, Axel shaking his head. They actually went a step further eventually and actually destroyed hardware with what was embedded in the firmware. Like they took down ATMs and telecom towers and the like. So do we think there's an opportunity? I mean, there's an opportunity. Do you think that's a likelihood here, or would that just be too extreme? And we don't have to answer it, but to me, I would be interested in the group's thoughts on that.
Oh, I can tell you something about that.
Okay.
I don't know if you all remember the 8255A, which was the parallel port, the intended parallel port for the original IBM PC. Well, that still is embedded in every North bridge for every processor from Intel. And it still has pull-up resistors and pull-down resistors, and it still has the ability to read and write from it. The problem is you can rewrite the registers that are basically set to input only, and you can let them do output. And you create a short circuit for all 8 bits in that particular register. And within 15 minutes, the North bridge will blow up. It's physically dead. So yes, you can still remotely kill a PC as of today, right? So, and there's in fact, if you look up NTSB and Athena, you will find that with a very, very simple hack, you can override the rev limits of a diesel generator and make it explode. Right, so there are a lot of ways that you can easily kill hardware, massive hardware, remotely.
Oh, the joy! And that's one thing that we have discussed today. And Axel, you also mentioned that was follow the money. So how can we leverage financials in this entire process, such that we encourage companies to be more secure on one hand, and on the other hand, following the money. And not just the political agenda, but also the money agenda. There's a political agenda. Why would I put 1,000 engineers or so to figure out how to hack the U.S.? But there's also a financial agenda. I mean, 1,000 engineer might be nothing if I can get X number of bitcoins per each engineer. I mean, it will be like minuscule at that point. And the last one is, I mean, we're looking at software changes. So if you're smart enough as engineer and you can change the software like this, it's not going to take that much time to change the software. Those code changes, this was not like 10,000 lines of codes being rewritten. These are just a few lines of code here and there. So it's mind-boggling as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's going to be very cost-effective to the other side. Whoever did it, they're going to make a lot of money out of it. So 1,000 engineers, nothing. It's a drop in a bucket.
Well, it's not how many lines of code you have to write. It's how many lines of code you have to read to figure out where to put those lines.
So put one, take 1,000 engineers, PhD researchers, put one on every subject and let them go read the code and understand it and figure out what to change. That's why it's 1,000 engineers, but they can make 1,000 different changes. They don't need to be even coordinated. Okay, it's basically bad for all of us. So our next meeting is going to be about privacy, and we will publish all the information. Whatever we have today and what we've covered today, we will publish both website, YouTube, our channels, etc. Moving forward. And I think my suggestion is we'll wait for next meeting will be about privacy, and the following meeting would be SolarWinds number 3. In the next 2 months, we're going to learn a lot. And unless somebody feels strong that we should actually focus on a specific area within the SolarWinds and go and dive deeper in terms of exploration, we can just let the world do its work and churn and come with their conclusion. So just speak up, whatever you feel.
So, Shmuel, maybe worth mentioning that the next meeting is going to be again third Thursday in March, privacy,
Yep.
and that's more open to the public kind of a meeting where if you feel that somebody should be present because they have an interest in a topic, they don't necessarily need to be an expert. They're welcome to attend.
So privacy, we start at a more open level where we first want to define privacy. I know all of you, when I say the word privacy, people kind of like get something in their mind about privacy and what it is. It's not very clear to me that we're all speaking the same language or thinking the same thoughts when it comes to privacy. So first, let's define what is privacy. What does that mean? And I bet that there will be multiple areas and multiple meanings and multiple ramifications to whatever the words mean to us. That's first. So the first meeting will go about definitions, and then we will figure out kind of like for the next meetings, which areas we want to focus on, understanding those areas, and then thinking about what can we do to help or make the difference in those areas. So it will be multiple meetings, but the first one is definitions and clarifying understanding. And I hope that all of you will come and will join, and we will invite the world to it as well. Thank you.
Right.
Any last words, Alex, or anybody else?
Did we decide just to, we could maybe take this offline and follow up with an announcement, but did we decide whether we're doing a panel or more of a forum discussion on the privacy first meeting next month?
We did not decide yet, so we'll take it offline and we'll have a discussion.
Shmuel, it would be really nice if in the fourth meeting, if any one of the members can come up with suggestions of what they would have liked to change based on everything that we know about SolarWinds, about how to actually solve the problem. And obviously some of it would be way too expensive with way too many resources that we don't have. But assuming we had that, what would we do?
Asher, I think you're right. I actually like your suggestion. I think we have all of us as a team, we are as individuals, we are involved and we learn a lot, and there's a lot that we can bring to the table. So I would love to hear all participants provide at least take 5 minutes and present your thoughts about it.
Okay.
That could be awesome. I like that.
Great.
Alex, what do you think?
Sure. I think that would be a good idea, but again, I think the premise has to be, it has to be at this point in time implementable, meaning it has to be fiduciary responsible, right? So you can't suggest to a client or even to a company like us, you can't say, throw all the servers out, start over.
But that's okay. This is a fair proposal, and we can say no. It's okay. I think all whatever is reasonable or unreasonable. I like to hear everybody's voice.
Well, I like that suggestion a lot from Asher, and there's a way to do that through kind of a design thinking exercise where we kind of throw things into a kind of a wider funnel and see what comes out the other end that actually has some potential to it. So if we get to a place with the SolarWinds topic where we're saying as a group we're committed to actually talking about solutions, right? Then I think that may be a good time to do that. I don't know that we have a lot to lose.
It's a good exercise, and it's not going to be black and white. There's going to be plenty in the gray that I think could be helpful. It might not solve the entire problem, but I think at least we'll build a few more layers to be able to help out the next SolarWinds, whatever that would be. So I don't think we can solve the problem entirely.
So Mike, how about we'll separate the meeting into, again, a very quick recap. What happened in the last, in the last 2 months that we haven't met. So just a short recap. Either Alex or Axel or somebody, will jump in and say, and any volunteer from the group right now is willing to take it on. Is more than invited to just say, yeah, I'll do it. And so we'll do like a 10-minute. Here's what's new. Here's what's etc. And then we'll take the rest of the meeting to separate it and allow every person to speak based on the participants. We'll see how many will divide the time and say, go.
Great.
Okay.
Terrific.
All right. I like that. But this is not the March meeting. This is the April meeting. And March meeting, privacy. Thank you, Asher, for
all right.
Another easy topic.
Another easy topic. Okay. Thank you, everybody. This was an awesome meeting. Thank you for participating.
Good to see everyone.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet
Thank
you all.
you.
Okay, thank you.